I know you don't like comedy, so but I feel like you'll appreciate it. I want someone, you by someone,
Uh-huh.
to watch the series finale, the 22-minute series finale of Two and a
Two and
Half
a Half
Men
Men.
for me.
It's true that you've
Just
been talking
like you don't
about
even have
it.
to watch the whole series, just the series finale, because I want someone else to appreciate how clever that was, cleverly it
Yeah.
was put together.
All right. You're
So
gonna
I'm
have to
just
text me about that because I'm not gonna remember.
or do it.
Yeah.
Seems unlikely. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Bringing up the old live chat. Who's first in? Josh Beachy's first one in, followed by Danielle Townsend, Nick Bowen, Janet Barney's here.
Yeah.
My J Lo, as I like to call her.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen Walkinshaw, Danielle, Brian Blanchett, Sans Zach. Brian, we are Sans Zach
I just said I
today.
was kind of hoping he would pop in here because he's been known to. And if he doesn't have a voice, then yeah,
Oh,
it
he
doesn't make
may.
sense to record. But if he's resting, maybe he'll pop in.
Yeah, he may. He sound when I talked to him this morning, via text, it sounded like he actually wasn't feeling well too. It wasn't just the voice thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he may not, because I asked him,
He
how's the
didn't.
voice, and
It's
he
true that
said,
he just said thank you to my text. It wasn't like,
yeah, he may be laying down. He told me he said like he's fucking over it. So Zach's got a weird spring summertime cold. Um, hope you're okay, buddy.
shh.
Oh, you jerk!
Oh, from.
I just saw that when you literally worded to me when you sent the get well soon that you're saying this is from both of us. Uh, it actually says, and this is from just Janet. Jackass. Uh,
Yeah.
are we doing True Crime Live tomorrow?
Yeah.
What
In the
time is
morning.
good
Want to do it in
for
the
you?
morning?
Morning's good for me.
Yeah. I think that's what we said, but we didn't actually pick a time.
Yeah, you weren't sure.
Can you do like what? What time?
I was gonna say, like, do you want to do it like when we started this at like an 8 your time, or do you want to do it later than that?
Yeah, I can do it at 8. I
What?
prefer 9, but if that's bad for you, I can make
No,
it
it's
work at
not.
8.
Nine's perfect.
Okay.
Nine's fine.
Okay.
9 o'clock.
As this is what
Um,
everyone comes here to see, you and me coordinating our schedules for
because
something
we only
semi-related but
speak.
not related.
Yeah, we only speak to each other
Yeah.
when we have an audience.
Uh-huh.
There's no
It's
sense of
not
ever.
worth it otherwise.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
not
we're
worth it.
doing
Hi,
all these lives
friends.
now. It seems like a lot to talk to you like a fifth time a week, you
I
know,
know.
just for shits and grins.
Yeah. And yet we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean
Kathleen, are you sick too?
offline.
Billy says a lot of people have gotten those late spring colds.
I
Hope
mean,
everyone's feeling okay.
that's
But
what
yeah, it's just
Zach
BJ,
got.
not BJZ. Brittany's cooking dinner. That always trips me up. I hope you have a wonderful dinner. All right.
I just had it actually had nothing to do with these people, but my brother had texted me about
Oh
something we're doing
no.
tomorrow and asked me what time. And I said, "Hang on, I have to ask my co-host and friend Janet Varney from television
Me.
what time we're going to be doing stuff." All right, what's going on in the chat here?
Well, what I want to tell you is that Teresa has some pretty breaking news, which I'm super excited about. I'm glad this is coming up. OMG, Bob, I'm having a flatbread type thing with red sauce, cheese, and pepperoni. I'm told it's called pizza.
Could you please tell Teresa, because I'm not talking to Teresa.
I
So
see, I
just know
see, I
this. So
see.
this is
Okay.
me not speaking to Teresa.
Got it.
But if you wouldn't mind telling Teresa that I said to fuck off, if you could just pass
Okay.
that
I'm not going to pass
along
that along.
from
I'm
me.
not going
Tell
to
her that
pass
I
that
said,
along.
well, can you at least tell her that I'm not speaking to her? I would tell her
Okay.
myself,
All
but
right.
again, I'm.
Teresa, and I want to apologize because he's being such a child.
Don't you apologize for me? Don't you?
Unfortunately, by not speaking to Teresa, you've left the door wide open
Oh, I wish there
for
was
me
something I
to
could do about
interpret
this.
it however I want to.
I wish there was something I
Too
could do about
late.
this.
Too late. Oh, Brittany's from South Carolina in the States, but stationed in England for 3 years. When I
Oh,
was
what?
over there and I did the Comic-Con in London, I met so many folks, Americans who were stationed in England, and it seemed pretty cool. It seemed like they were having a pretty good time. So,
I
Brittany, I
met
hope your
Idris
experience
Elba
has
in
been
England.
good.
We had a nice experience, the two of us.
Oh, you guys are tight.
Yeah, me and
You
Idris.
you coming into that situation as a massive fan.
Yeah, yep.
Oh, great story.
Uh,
Great story. Teresa says she's not listening to you. So,
well, that's fine because I wasn't talking to her. What's J Lo say? Did you guys see Jamie Snow's case on Georgetown's making an exact? I need to look. So we just talked about it in our live that
Yeah, I watched
video,
that 8-minute video. It was great.
but was that part of Georgetown's thing, or like what else am I missing from it? And I feel terrible because Tammy Alexander had like in the middle of like 9,000 things happening at once, like a few weeks ago. Like I just remembered, sent me something about the Georgetown making exoneree, which is of course where Adnan Syed is working now,
Yeah.
and this thing about Jamie, and I like lost track of what it was somehow and lost track of the text. Um, so yeah, what is is it a show? Is it a show? Is it a documentary? Is it the thing that I shared on True Crime Live? Do you know?
Well, I watched the video, but
Right.
I don't remember if it was associated explicitly with Georgetown's making the exoneree or if it was an independently made. I
Help us
mean,
out here,
I
J Lo.
watched it.
Google image.
Uh-oh, Dr.
Special.
Shiloh's here.
What's up? What's up? Yeah. I was gonna to call you JV. I was gonna, but I couldn't pull the initials to use.
Uh-huh.
What's up, DS? I don't know. That's not good.
Okay, all right.
Let's not call her DS.
DS. Yeah, well, actually you should because they don't use their last names anyway, so it makes sense for you to make the initials DS.
Oh,
I'm very
right.
excited, and anyone who is in the LA area should consider this if they have the ability to do so. I'm going to the LA Not So Confidential live show this Saturday night,
Oh,
which they are doing in conjunction with the LA Paranormal. I'm so sorry, Shiloh. I'm forgetting. It's because I'm such a huge fan of yours, but I know it's LA
okay.
Meekly and then the LA Para Weirdle podcast. I'm so sorry. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I'm sure you're going to tell us.
Uh,
Ooh, anyway,
yes,
anyway, I think there's still a handful of tickets left at best, but you should try to do it. It's at this really cool historic house air and like a little pocket of old historic homes in kind of the Eagle Rock area, and I'm so excited. It's going to be very cool.
that sounds awesome. I wish
Yeah.
I have no desire, and I do want to point out that that video that I shared. So, for those of you that don't know, maybe somebody can throw the link in the chat here. But also, if you go to our True Crime Live episode, which is also here on YouTube from Monday, in the description, I put the link to that video. So that video
Oh, okay.
that
So
was
it
made
is
by the
making the money.
undergrads.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer Lopez, who I'm refusing to call J Lo because Jennifer is her own person.
Oh, J Lo, just speaking of J Lo, just text me
Great,
the
Grayson, happy Saturday
link.
birthday. Holly Weird. I was so close, Shiloh. You know I was close. Holly Weird Paranormal. Yes, of course. What am I going to wear? Oh no, what am I going to wear? Do I need to wear a period piece? Shiloh, help, help. Do I need to wear a haunted petticoat?
I'm certain I don't know what a period piece means, but whatever I think it means is cannot be accurate.
I'm also positive that that's true. Although, shout out to the great film Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Saw it in the theater. Loved it.
Oh, Becky and I went, what a great movie.
Isn't it great?
Oh
Oh,
my God.
what a
It's
great
such a
movie.
feel good movie. So,
Yeah.
um, Becky and I we wanted to do Edmonton theater for a while. And so we're like, let's do dinner and a movie. And she had been saying she wanted to go see that movie. Um, and
Yeah.
I didn't know
Love.
anything about it. That's a book like she read when she
Oh, yeah.
was,
Judy Bloom. Mm-hmm.
yep, the Judy Bloom. And she was saying that she had wanted to go see it, but she was trying to find one of her girlfriends to go with, whatever. And then the movie we were planning to go see, there weren't enough seats left because we didn't get tickets early enough. And we were like trying, I was like, well, I'll just take you to go see that. And she's like, you don't want to go see that. It's a chick flick. You don't want to.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't really care. I like going to the theater in general,
Yeah.
and you want to see it. So let's go see the thing that you want to see. It's fine. So like I had to talk her into going because she was so
Yeah.
convinced I wouldn't like it. Loved it.
I'm so glad to hear
Loved
that.
it so much. It was just
It's
such a
so good.
the,
Isn't
the
Rachel McAdams just like she's
amazing.
so wonderful.
And the best word I could use to describe it, correct me if you don't agree, but wholesome.
Yeah.
It was such a like just wholesome, happy, joyful. Like I loved
Yeah.
every minute. I think I cried a
Yeah.
couple times.
Yeah, you know I cry. Come
Right. Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Zach cried from home. He didn't even see it.
Uh-huh.
Thanks, Brian, Brian with a $2 super chat, wishing Zach to feel better with a broken heart.
I know. Well, I keep meaning to say whenever I see Brian's name come up on here, I always want to do a really bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impression because Brandon's brother loves Arnold. He's autistic and he loves his two favorite like
Hmm.
characters in the world are Ace Ventura and basically Arnold doing anything. So
Solid.
whenever I see Brian's name, I always want to go Brian because I spend a lot of time like
Yeah.
calling his brother and going, Brian, what are you doing, Brian? Get in the chopper.
You should do more
So
voices.
thank you, Brian,
You
for the
know,
super chat.
what from now on, whenever Brian super chats, you do this, and and anybody else that super chats, I think that should bring out your Viola character, which is one of my favorites.
Well, I do think this is a super group. So if the super chat is ignited by Viola, then Viola, we've made a little extra money to support the pod.
Pod. Don't care
Okay.
for
Yeah,
pods.
Kathy Bates also amazing. I mean, everyone was just so good. Yeah, the kiddo was so great. Abby, I think her name is that
Oh, I'm
actress.
so happy
That was
that we went to
wonderful.
see it in the theater
Yeah.
because it was just like I cannot remember like that same weekend we ended up going to see with my oldest stepson. He loves horror movies, so we went to
Yeah.
see like Evil Dead Rising.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The worst movie I've ever
Okay.
seen.
Good to
You know, and
know.
I enjoy a nice horror movie, but
Good to know.
literally eye roll like really
Oh,
like this is terrible. And he
yeah.
was still I just kept whispering to it. And I'm like, this is like the
You
most
wanted to see
this
this. Yeah.
yeah. How much longer till this is over? He's like, shut up. But yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
But yeah, but
Oh,
that
well.
movie was yeah, it was just
Yeah.
I mean I was just I didn't want it to end and it was over. It was just like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
and like everybody in the theater, like you I couldn't see because it's dark, but you can hear everybody doing this. Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. And the Judy Blume documentary that's out, it might be on Hulu or it might be on HBO Max. I can't remember, but there's also a great Judy Blume documentary right now
yeah,
that's about like all of her different books. And there's a bunch of kind of celebrities and authors and stuff who talk about like how much her books influenced them. It's great. She kept correspondence with kids like into their
really
adulthood. Yeah, people would write her and like they were keeping a journal and be like, "I can't tell anyone this, but I want to tell you, Judy." Oh, it's just another. It's like that
yeah,
movie feeling for
fantastic.
another hour and a half because
Did you take
it's
Brandon?
adorable. Yeah,
Did he enjoy it as
loved
well?
it.
Loved
Yeah,
it.
he loved it.
Yeah, and then I was mad at Becky for saying that it because she
That you
almost
wouldn't have liked
denied
it.
me
Yeah,
to tell me that I wouldn't like it because I'm a dude, you know, because
yeah.
I'm
This
a
is a good lesson
rugged dude.
for everyone. Like now she knows maybe Bob will like this movie that I thought maybe he wouldn't want to go see, and then you guys will go
Well,
see
she
some more.
uses that excuse for things that are on Netflix that she wants to watch.
Oh, that she watches without you because she'd rather
Yeah,
just watch it
especially
right
in the
away.
summer
You
when
wouldn't
she's
like
not
this. Yeah,
working, when she's
I get
home.
that.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
she'll just be like Parenthood. I've never seen Parenthood. Like I came in and she's like
The
four
movie
seasons.
Parenthood? Like with
No, the series
the
Parenthood.
series. Yeah, 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 yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and like I had said, like everybody saw like how amazing this series is. She's like, oh yeah, I watched it. I'm like, everybody, why didn't we watch it? Like we have things we have said in the evenings. Like, oh, there's nothing to watch. It's like, oh, I didn't think you'd like it. I'm like, bullshit. You knew I'd like it. You knew it, but you didn't want to wait for me to watch it.
Yeah, you're on to her.
Uh, Bobby, maybe she didn't want
I
you to
should do this.
go because you smell. That's very possible. Although I think I did shower that night. Tight space, no shower. Everybody's got True Crime Live. Yeah.
Oh, it's on Amazon. Okay, so every one of my guesses was wrong. That Judy Bloom documentary's on Amazon. Thank you, K.R. Fairfield. Um, okay, all right. You want to get into
Nicole,
this? I guess I realized I
yeah,
was
but real
hoping.
quick, I want to
Oh
because
yeah,
finally somebody
yeah.
else saw it. Nicole said, saw Fool's Paradise. We talked about that a little bit on the True Crime Live on Monday. I did too. My thing with it, Nicole, was that it wasn't what I was expecting. That it was like that's the one the Charlie
Oh,
Day
the
story.
Charlie Day one, right?
Yeah. I went into it thinking that it was going to be slapstick comedy, Charlie Day style comedy, and that's not what it was. I appreciated the movie for what it was, which was a very artsy um satire and kind of a pretty smart look at like Hollywood and the people and stuff like that.
Right,
From the perspective of him, someone who works in
right,
the industry. Um, yeah, I was just I walked away just feeling like, that's not. But then later thought
right.
about it. I was like, well, it was the reason I didn't like it was because I thought it was this, and it was
Yeah.
something completely different.
Which isn't fair to the movie. Like I
No.
feel like that's happened to me so many times where I see a trailer and I'm like, "Oh, cool, you've set me up to see this type of movie." And then you see the movie that it really is and it's like, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
that wasn't fair to anyone. It's not fair to the movie to misrepresent it. It's not fair to the audience to misrepresent it." Like,
Yeah. And
so
to be
maybe that's what
fair,
happened.
I watched the Always Sunny podcast on
Yeah.
the Monday before, where Charlie and Glenn and Rob all were like talking about the movie coming out, and
Yeah.
it was what he described, but my
Okay.
brain was still like,
Right. I love
that's
Charlie
Charlie
Day.
Day.
Yeah.
Charlie
Yeah. I
Day,
got it.
Ken Jeong. It's like it's gonna be hilarious. It wasn't hilarious.
I got it. I
Um,
got it.
I am on
Um,
the last episode of Jury Duty, Valerie, and we're gonna start this show. We'll
okay.
start the show.
You guys are so
Uh,
patient. So but we should be getting all of this. We get all of this out when we do True Crime Live. We have no excuse for it being 9:25 and we haven't started yet. I
Yeah,
apologize
it's
to
because
everyone,
we
one and all.
only speak to each other when we have an audience. It's the only time we ever talk. All right, I guess we'll
Okay.
start this thing. I have no idea what your intro was. Sounds like it was quite a debacle.
When Kelly works her magic, it's going to be a nice tight intro without a lot of
Peop-
frills. But I
Yeah,
did explain that we are songs, Zach.
okay. And remember, I'm going to upfront talk a little bit about that thing we talked about,
Got it.
the post about Christian.
Okay.
All righty. And that might, you know what, that might draw out some folks that end up getting blocked from the chat because
Oh
I'm just in
boy.
a trigger happy mood.
Okay.
Here we go. All right, thanks everybody for joining us today. As I'm sure Janet mentioned in the intro, we are sans Zach today. He's not even on an assignment today. Zach's a little under the weather, doesn't have a voice and couldn't make it. But Janet and I are gonna push through in
Yeah.
today's episode of what show are we doing today?
This is Truth and Justice.
That's the one. Yeah, the Truth and Justice. Sorry, getting a little mix up. Real quick before we get into the episode and all your questions, which we're going to do, I do want to address, just out of transparency and mild irritation on my part. I do want to address something that was brought up on the fan page, as is typical when we come out with an episode that has some new evidence in it. There's a group of folks that try to derail the conversation away from that and to another direction. But of course, and I was accused of being biased and not presenting the state's case and all that. So I want to address it here. There was a group that got together on one page and then came over on our page to point out the fact that Christian, the claim was that Christian lied in his first interview because he claimed that he didn't know Becky was dead. And they had cropped out and screenshot a small portion of that interview where Michael says, well, he's talking about, why they're there. And he goes, Becky, you know, she's dead, right? And Christian says, no, Robert had, and then he kind of tails off. And then that's the part in the interview. You can go back and read the transcript, where Michael's telling him, like, I know this is nerve wracking, but calm down, do all that stuff. And so anyway, if you're on the fan page, you saw there's like this huge thread where everybody debating whether Christian did know that Becky was dead or not. And they pointed out that John, earlier in the interview before Christian was there, had said that that he had seen the tragedy, is the way he puts it, in the
Mhm.
paper, and Christian had told him that yeah, they know that girl, that's Robert's ex-girlfriend, and that they had plans. His dad says that they had plans to go to a barbecue or something up there
Mhm.
that day. And so they said, with those things together, since the interview was on the 28th, on the 27th was the day that her body was finally identified, and then that was put out to the public. There's a newspaper article on the 27th that said that her body had been identified. So putting those together, they said there's no way that that Robert, or that Christian, didn't know Becky was dead because his dad saw the paper. Now, granted, there was lots of newspaper articles over the course of those 10 days about the case. His dad said he had been out of town and he came back and was looking at the papers. We don't even know which paper he was looking at.
Mhm.
But of course, Becky and John and Vicky's pictures were in most of those articles. But so the claim was made, and several people said that this is one of the reasons they think Christian is guilty, because why would he lie to them and say that he didn't know Becky was dead? I want to address that because what they didn't tell you, or what they cropped out of that page, was the rest of Christian's answer. After the calm down and everything, Christian says, Michael's asked, like, what do you know about it? And Christian says, I know there was a fire. I know there was 3 people dead. There were 2 people that were in the house, and then there was one body that was, he says, in a dumpster or something. Is what he says, and then he says what he had started to say earlier was, last I heard from Robert, they hadn't identified the body yet. That you guys didn't know who was there yet, but I'm guessing you know now.
Mm.
So that was the full context of that. So if you were to read that, you would see me saying, like, this is nothing. He didn't lie and say he didn't know Becky was dead. He didn't even say he didn't know Becky was dead. What he said was he knew 3 people had died.
Hmm.
He knew 2 were in the house. He knew 1 was outside, he thinks in a dumpster. Uh, and he thought that the body hadn't been identified yet. And then Michaels tells him, yes, it has been identified yet. So out of full transparency, because I don't want to be biased, I want to make sure to point out that I saw that, had the conversation, and if you want to read the transcript, go read Christian's transcript from September 28th. So when you see the claims that Christian lied and said he didn't know Becky was dead, what Christian actually said was that he knew there were people dead, didn't know that they had officially identified the body yet. So I just wanted to make sure to cover that before we move on to this episode, to make sure that we're covering everything.
Got it.
Because again, that was, and I will, and we're gonna move on, but I will point out, I had conversations in that thread with people who claimed that my entire investigation has been biased because I haven't presented the case. I've asked them, what have I not presented? Literally presented the entire prosecution's case. We've now, as of this coming Sunday, will have presented the entire trial, all the documents out there. At one point, I asked this specific person, what things do you want me to cover that you think I haven't covered that make them look guilty? We covered that. I've also invited anyone to come on and make the case for guilt. And so then I was told that because Robert's mom, Kathleen, one time in one of these chats, um, did a super chat for $5 or $4.99 for us, which was really nice of Kathleen to do. And I was told that clearly that was my motivation for committing the last year and a half of my life to this case, was all hoping that Kathleen would buy me a cup of coffee, which finally happened last week. So there's my bias. I'll stop being snarky. Just you only can listen to so much bullshit before you just got to call people out on their bullshit. And with that being said, Janet, what do you think about Moore's closing argument?
Uh, I I liked it. I'm interested. There were some folks who, and I sort of put this first in the follow-up order. There were some folks who, in the episode, you do say, and you said it, I think, in last week's follow-up, that you weren't necessarily a huge fan of Moore's
Hmm.
approach, but there was a lot of really interesting information in there.
Yeah.
Valeria very astutely had discovered just prior to you covering Moore's closing that the lighter had been found, was in evidence, at least was listed in evidence, along with some other stuff that you get into in this episode. But so there were some folks who walked away, like Keith and Liz and Alex, who kind of liked the closing and were maybe interested to hear a little bit more from you on why you had such a strong reaction to it, in the
Yeah.
slightly more negative category.
Uh, to be clear, I don't have an issue at all with the entirety of Moore's closing. What I didn't care for was the presentation of the imaginary scenario, and the reason was, really, that's, to me, it's fair is fair. I've called out the state for creating scenarios that weren't supported by the evidence. Um, and so, and that's what Moore did in a couple of instances, right? So he tried to fit a scenario together that fit the evidence, but then he also filled in some, like Becky called Robert on Monday. Well, we don't know if Becky called Robert on Monday. We don't have he says from the home phone. He said that specifically because we don't have the home phone records from that day, and we don't have Robert's records from that day. So there's no way to prove that happened. That was my only issue, was that first segment where he gave the imaginary scenario. After that, I think he made some really good points, and truthfully, the part that I thought that was the most brilliant is probably a strong word, but it was a great strategy, was the way he handled Jeremy Witt, rather than just saying like, "This guy's full of shit. Don't listen to him. Like he's not credible. He's not trustworthy." I think that more accurately picked up on the fact that no one probably believed Witt. And so he spends a lot of, and if you read I talked about it, but if you read the transcript, you'll see he spends a fair amount of time driving home the fact that Jeremy Witt is a linchpin of the state's case. So it's kind of a set him up and knock him down scenario where he's saying, listen, they have to have Jeremy Witt in order to have a case. If you don't believe Jeremy Witt, then they don't have a case. You have to, he's crucial to their case, and then moves on to say, and here's all the reasons why you can't believe Jeremy Witt.
Mm,
I thought that was well done. So yeah,
yeah.
the second half of his closing, I did like. I didn't like the first part. Um, that said, I think that I don't know if he had much of an option outside of that, um,
Well,
because
yeah.
the state presented a scenario, so like you have to present
Who's
a
got the best
counter
story?
scenario, and he was handcuffed by the fact that he couldn't name any alternate suspects
Yeah.
in his closing. So there wasn't a lot much more he would do. For me, I did like Dolan's approach better, which was just really hammering away like these things are not proven. They're telling you things happened that aren't proven by the evidence.
Yeah, I again, just I mean, I know I just interrupted you and I apologize for that, but just the whole who tells the best story, we've talked about it so much on the podcast in general. And so I wasn't necessarily expecting a story to be told, a scenario to be given that could
Mhm.
help paint a picture that would at least pull focus off of the story that the state told. So I had mixed feelings about it because I felt like I would probably feel compelled to do the same thing. I mean, just because I do feel like we kind of have an understanding that, you can't just say they didn't prove their case, that people want to have a narrative. And so he did provide some kind of a narrative. The problem was that maybe it wasn't the best narrative, and like you said, he was also not able to say a lot of things that I'm sure could have helped
Yeah.
that. But I just want to really quickly shout out SL on the chat, because just to circle back very quickly to the idea of bias. We've had people and coming from the opposite direction. SL says, I know people were complaining on previous seasons for the emotional pulls on them, and so early on, you had kind of made a decision not to publish a bunch of stuff that could you could be accused of tugging at people's heartstrings.
Mhm.
And so now we're coming towards the end of the season, and in fact, there's a you could actually argue there's an absence of bias in that you haven't given the human beings behind
Yeah.
what's happened who are in prison the same kind of voice that maybe you have in past seasons. So just to kind of counterbalance the bias idea, there have also been folks who are like, I want to hear more about the guys. I want to know
Mhm.
them better now that we have talked about the evidence and the facts. And so I know there's been a lot of interest in that, and so SL brings that back up now.
Yeah, and that's coming. We're working on trying to do an interview um, with the guys, at least Robert. The two guys have two different legal teams that have two different views on how they should interact with media. So there's a lot of that's up in the air, but we're working on something like that. But there's definitely some family interviews and some people from the family that people are going to hear from. I also want to point out from the chat, Montana makes a good point, and I agree with her. She says, I think it was problematic that Dolan stressed the importance of presenting the evidence rather than telling a story divorced from the evidence. But then Moore comes up right after and tells a fantastical story.
Absolutely. Could not agree more, Montana.
Yeah,
That's a great point.
yeah, and I'll tell you that in what we're going to get this week, which is the state's rebuttal, Aki caught onto that as well.
Uh-huh.
And the other part about the issue I have with the narrative approach that Moore took too is I think what you run the risk of is if you say something that the jury doesn't buy, then I think it affects your credibility.
Sure.
Like even like and I mentioned that in Dolan's too, when Dolan talks about the garage door, like after Tim left, then he came back and then put accelerant on the body and lit it on fire again, and then went in and closed the garage door. I always worried, like, if the jury is like, "Mm, that sounds like nonsense," then will they think the rest of it is nonsense
Right.
too?
Right. Okay, so let's move into some specifics from the Facebook post. Speaking of the cell stuff that comes up in this episode, Kristen says, "Can you explain what you meant about the cell tower being connected to the guard device? I was very confused."
It's GAR device, and hopefully I got that right. I think I did. The device, they talk about it in Gillette's testimony. He talks about what it is and how it works. It's a device made by Gladiator, I believe, and it's a device that's connected to the car and computers and stuff. That's what they use to drive around when they're driving around to the drive test to gather all the data. Um, but it was, and I had never considered until Moore said that, and then also back from my conversations with Mike Dowd, our expert, and then other experts that I've talked to that weren't able to come on and do interviews, um, where they said all the time, like, different phones have different, like, you can have two phones right next to each other, and one will connect to one tower and one will connect to a different one because they have different external antennas, they have different internal antennas. And that got me thinking when Moore brought that up, that these drive tests were done. Like when they show they could find these tiny little spots where 523 could catch some coverage on 74. That was from the GAR device, which, from what I was able to find online, looks like they're like external antennas that are on the car. And then and it got me wondering, well, so that was able, something that might have a 12-inch external antenna could maybe make a connection to that tower from 8 miles away, but could, a Nokia with a 1-inch antenna inside the car make that same connection? And I'm not saying it can't. I'm saying we don't know because that wasn't done. And to be honest, the entire drive tests that were done are problematic, in my opinion. Shouldn't have been allowed to begin with because they were done 10 years later. They can, they can say that, they said, Verizon says basically the towers, everything is essentially the same. First of all, I don't think that's entirely true.
Mm.
Second of all, even if nothing changed with the towers, what did change for sure was the phones that are connecting to the tower, buildings around the towers, there, construction. There's all these different things that have changed, over the 12 years between when the crime happened and when the Gladiator report was done and made. I don't see how, when I think back on it, how is that even allowed to be used as evidence? You can't say, I checked the cell coverage in an area 12 years later, and that's what we're going to use to prove where these guys were at. That's crazy to me that they were able to do that. Um, and then even think, like, in 2006, 3G was just coming out, right? That a 3G signal. By 2018, 4G, their 4G LTE was, they're different I don't see how they can say nothing changed. Something
Right.
changed.
Right.
The types of signals that were coming off those towers have changed. And I don't, and again, I'm not an expert, so I don't know. Maybe those have the exact same range and everything between a 3G and a 4G or LTE or now 5G, but it seems very, very strange to me that was even allowed in. But to get
And it
back to
was,
the,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask if the defense brought up any of that
I think just what you saw in the
just
closing,
in
just the fact
closing.
that there was no, phones ever used. But and that gets back to the root of the question. That's what I meant was,
Right.
they were driving around with a device connected to a car, um, not driving around with a phone in a car.
I mean, you would
Um,
think that would come up in cross when they were actually speaking to when that part of the like trial was happening.
yeah, and I'd have to go back and review the testimony's up on our website, but I'd have to go back and review the testimony. My guess is if it came up in cross, they may have just asked the question, "Did you ever use a phone?" Um,
Right.
or anything like that. But I don't recall that because it was because and I say that because it jumped out at me when I
Yeah.
was reading Moore's
Yeah.
closing when he said it. I'm like, oh my god! Like, besides it, and Chris in the chat mentions too, like, on top of that, like, traffic patterns, growth, everything changed over that time, which is exactly right. Um, but then it jumped out at me that yeah, they had never used phones. So I don't know how. And by the way, that can be the same for Bodmer's drive test. How in the hell do they take a drive test done 12 years after the fact to tell you how long it would have taken in a different vehicle with a different driver, how they were able to allow to use that to tell the jury how long it would have taken Robert and Christian in an Acura 12 years earlier
Right.
to make that drive. That's bananas too. I don't get how any of that was allowed.
And that would have been in pretrial. The lawyers would have said, like, Your Honor, we argue that you can't even admit this in. You shouldn't be allowed to do this, which makes
Yeah,
me wonder, like, just in general. I mean, you don't always hear about this in cases, but certainly in cases where people have taken a hard look at, and when there's been, tape of or in-depth conversations about things like the OJ trial or something, people do talk about the preferences or the preferential treatment that some people perceive was shown to the prosecution or to the defense,
hmm,
in those various cases. And so that's not something we really talked about much, for this case, but just those little moments that build up, if if you can see that a judge is kind of showing preferential treatment to the prosecution
yeah,
in
and
terms of
I
where the
know that.
objections and sustainings and all those sort of things happen.
Yeah, and I know that in this case, there was a lot of the defense took a lot of L's in pretrial. One of them being alternate suspects. They
Right,
were fighting to be allowed to bring up alternate suspects, and they just got shot down by the judge.
right. Carrie says there has been a lot of talk of phone calls made. Do we know if Robert or Christian tried to call Becky's cell phone after the fire to help look for her? I'm assuming kind of along the same lines as like Adnan never called Hey again, that kind of
Right.
argument maybe. Even if her cell was destroyed in the house, her voicemail would be still be active within the carrier system.
Yeah. No. No. There's no records of Robert ever trying to call her. I think so. Remember the Robert's first in a world where Robert's innocent.
Hmm.
His first word he knew that there was any issue. So again, I'm not asking you to believe he's innocent, but just imagine it for this scenario. That he had nothing to do with this. So that would mean that he spent Sunday night with her blowing up his phone and him ignoring all of her calls. And then he gets up in the morning, and then the first call he gets is from Javier, um, telling him like there was a fire, there's all this going on, I can't get a hold of her, I'm going up there. Goes up there and he's getting all the updates from Javier that there's people dead and her car's there, so on and so forth. Um, that would be if in a world where Robert was innocent, that would be where things would stand with him, and he didn't make any calls. Now that said, Javier after that, I think did still try to make calls, and I think he'd said at one point that he just wanted to hear her voice on the voicemail, and I think even Jacob tried. Well, Jacob is a little different because Jacob was calling her. He just got like some information from Javier, didn't know what was going on,
Yeah.
and then he started calling Becky,
Oh,
looking
yeah.
for her
Yeah.
during that day. But no, the short answer to the question is no. Robert never tried to call her after that.
Okay. Uh, let's get into the hair and the lighter. Chris says, was the area where the green lighter was found photographed the night of the murder? Could this really have been missed? Family, friends, and neighbors must have been all over the scene in the week since this info was found.
I wasn't. I have not seen any photos of the lighter even in place where it was found. It's just another like the report says it was at the intersection of the driveway and Alpine Drive, northwest of there on the Freedley property, is where this lighter was found. There's a file of pictures that are their title is like Pablo and sifting through scene or whatever, and that's where these photos were found. And like we see one picture of the lighter and it's like set on a piece of paper or something to take a picture, but they never photographed it in place, so I don't know where it was found. But that's a good point to be worth, because there are some pictures out at the end of the driveway of like the fire trucks and stuff.
Hmm.
um be interesting to see if it's out there, but there's no way to know. If we had a photo showing like it's right there, then absolutely we could go look at some of those pictures and find that exact spot, but all we
Hmm.
know is it was somewhere over there. um So we don't really know where it was at. Did they ask something about the hair too, or was it just the lighter they were asking about?
This is just my section of, questions that came in that I organized that have to do with either the
Okay.
hair or the lighter or both. Tracy says, did anyone say if they found footprints on the north side of the house where the hair and lighter were found? They made such a big deal about the footprints going out into the desert where the wheelbarrow track was, but I can't remember if they said anything about any other prints around the back of the house.
No, and remember that's what we've been complaining about since the beginning is there's a
Yeah.
path from that back porch or the back door, which is where one, where the back door is, and two, the area where was kind of the escape route that was planned out that we heard about from Drew, where they would escape, but that would also come down on that back porch. There's a bay window right there that they use as kind of a step to get down from the roof if they you know went out the upstairs window. And there's a path directly from that back door to directly where the body in the wheelbarrow was found. And we have no pictures of that path. Now granted, there's a lot of firefighter tracks and stuff in there, but we have like it was never searched for evidence. They never used luminol, nothing to look for blood, nothing along that. So there were tracks all over the place from the firefighters.
Right.
So after the fact, I don't think footprints would be super helpful in that area.
Okay.
But obviously, if you found a pair of tennis shoe prints, not fire boots, that would be worth noting at least. My issue with that was always like, at least go through that area and spray luminol and see if you can find any blood.
Right.
But they didn't.
Right. Kristen says, could the hair on lighter have been tested, but the results weren't shared with the defense?
I'd hate to speculate on that. I mean, anything's possible. Um, and if that was the case, then that would obviously be a massive, massive Brady violation. But I don't see any evidence that they do. Someone had mentioned to me um, that there was a clump of hair found in a brush, in a hairbrush, I
Mm-hmm.
think from one of the cars
Hmm.
that they had taken. We're going to test to use for DNA to try to ID Vicky's body, but it wasn't used for that. So I need to track that down and figure that out. But this was not hair on a brush. This was just like somewhere north in the north side of the house was this clump of hair. That's all we know, and I have no record of it ever being tested.
Okay. Well, Kim had followed up and mentioned the Brady possibility and even said, can the prosecution not proceeding with testing items that could have been exculpatory grounds be grounds for an appeal?
No, no, not unless they're. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is it could only be used as grounds for an appeal if they now were to do testing on it and it was exculpatory. And I want to make clear too, like there were, of course, there were people that were like just mad about bringing it. I had people tell me it's ridiculous for me to even suggest that this hair could be anything of any importance. I'm not saying that it is. What I'm saying is it could be, and we should know. Like
Right.
that's the story of this entire case. The whole thing is we don't know if Robert and Christian's alibis checked out because they never checked. They never looked. They never tried to find out. We don't know if this hair is relevant because it was never tested. It was never checked out. We don't know if the lighter was relevant because it was never tested. It was never checked out. The scenario I gave in the episode is just like here's one way this could have went. You find DNA profiles on the socks. Everybody we know is excluded. Robert, Christian, I believe Ron, Javier, Jacob, they're all excluded as contributors from that DNA. So okay, that in my opinion, very likely is your killer's DNA, but we don't know who it belongs to. They never run that through CODIS to see if they can find out who it belongs to. But then you also have this hair here. Well, how much more relevant would it be? Certainly, I think anybody being objective can agree it's not out of the question for Becky to have yanked a chunk of hair out of her attacker's head. That's not unreasonable at all for something to happen. It happens all the time in cases like this. But imagine if they had tested that for DNA. We still don't know who it is, but we know that hair came from the same person that touched her sock. Now, how much more? Now, is there a case against Robert and Christian at all? Probably not. And then throw the lighter in. What if we find in the lighter there's DNA there that matches one or either of those or both of those? And I'm not saying that's the case. What I'm saying is we should know if that's the case. And I sincerely hope that the defense teams are working with the DA to do some DNA testing to get some of these answers.
Montana says, what would it have taken for the defense to do any testing on any items?
They would have had to have requested it. I don't know exactly how that process would work, but they should have been able. But the problem is too, like they don't know what all. Well, they do because they get discovery at some point before the trial that tells them all the stuff that was collected. This file that we have is the discovery file.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think they would have just had to request for the state to test certain evidence, and then that information would have to be brought up. But
Hmm.
obviously, they didn't.
Maury says, I think it's only very recently that hair could be tested without the root. Does this hair have roots? And if not, could that have factored into why it wasn't tested?
We don't know if it has roots, because all we have is one picture of it
Hmm.
and a note in the report that it was there, and a note that it was barcoded and put into evidence, and it was never tested. So, but yes, there are. If not, then now you can do DNA testing uh, uh, without a root on
Hmm.
hair, and that's one of the things like in the West Memphis 3 case that we're hoping would be nice if we could do some of that, because there was hair testing done on some hairs, but they weren't able to get full profiles because they didn't have nuclear DNA on them, or they didn't have a root. Well, now they can get full profiles. And on the topic of DNA, somebody, Bob in the chat, said that, and this is another thing I keep hearing, was that my DNA expert said that you couldn't put the DNA from the sock into CODIS, and I've heard over and over again that it's YSTR DNA, and you can't put that through CODIS. Some of the DNA was YSTR DNA, but as per, per, per,
Porphyria?
porphyria,
Porphyria?
yeah, yes. As she knows, there was both YSTR and autosomal. I can't speak today.
Hmm.
I speak words for a living. That's what I do, but not today. And the autosomal that word can be run through CODIS. There's no question about this. There are some of those profiles are rock solid profiles that have enough data to be put into CODIS, and the examiner that found the DNA at the bottom said that it checked the box. I have to make sure to say they checked the box and didn't write this. They checked the box that it is ready to be uploaded to CODIS. It
Okay.
just didn't.
And as Jennifer pointed out in the Facebook follow-up chat, we don't even know if the hair was human or synthetic.
Right. We don't know anything about
It
it.
could
All we
have
know
been
is
a wig.
clump
It could
of
have been a
hair.
costume. Yeah, it could have. Yeah, and it
And it
does
was
look
shocking.
singed. It certainly looks singed to me. But again,
Yeah.
that's just by eyeballing a photograph.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It looked like part of it was singed. And that's why it's a huge deal. And again, it could turn out that it's nothing.
Right.
But this hair, it clearly wasn't like, in my opinion, is absolutely not from one of the victims. Just based on the color and length, it's not Becky or Ron or John's.
Mhm.
Vicky, we have pictures of Vicky as blonde. We have picture of Vicky with brown hair. We have pictures of Vicky with her hair dyed red. So who knows if it could be Vicky's and it's longer. But we know that Vicky's hair and head was like, this did not come off Vicky's body,
Right.
unless it was like yanked out in a struggle outside somewhere. My theory on it is it was probably that hair was probably found outside. It was close enough to the fire that some of it got singed, but it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't in the fire because it would have just been completely burned away if it was inside the house. And we see the conditions of the bodies that were. Well, I mean, you guys haven't seen the conditions. I can when you have entire legs and arms just burnt away. There's not hair left at the end of that process.
Understood.
So it could be. Is there a possibility that it could be maybe Vicky's if there was some struggle outside? You can't rule that out as a possibility, but to me, like, that's a huge find. Like, we have Becky, who in my opinion was the surprise here. I think Moore was pretty close in his I agree pretty much with what he said about how Becky came into this, which was they didn't know she was there. We talked about that months ago. And that if she, she's missing the shoe, we don't know how she died. If there was a struggle, like that could have been just laying right on the back porch. Because you also see like there's not a bunch of debris and stuff on that, like the
Mm-hmm.
paper, whatever they take the picture on. So I don't think this was sifted, right? So I don't think they took a clump of ash, wet ash, and sifted through and found this hair there. To me, it looks like that hair was probably, somewhere out near that area in the north side of the house, but it was probably just laying on the ground because, like, how would you see? It's black, and if you
Right.
sifted it, it wouldn't stay in that clump together, and it would be filled with debris. Like, I think it was probably found right there, like, in the area where I think the struggle with Becky happened.
Hmm. Yeah, I can't. I mean, again, I can't. I just can't really tell anything from the picture. It looks like it could be synthetic to me, but I know there was also a thread on Facebook mentioning that some killers are known to wear disguises, are known to disguise their appearances, and even just the
Yeah.
evidence that someone was in disguise is could potentially be interesting.
Yeah. Hey, if we if we test and find out it's synthetic hair, so be it.
Right.
But this shouldn't be a question. That's my
Right.
point is this
Yeah.
shouldn't still be a question in 2023 whether or not that was real hair or synthetic hair,
Yeah.
or who it belongs to, or if there was DNA on it. This shouldn't be a question now.
Yeah. Moving into the lighter, Sarah says, how dangerous is it to light gasoline using a lighter? I'm wondering what the chances are that the person might have gotten burned if they used a lighter like this to start the fire.
Well, you have to remember that the fire started with something, right? So you kind of narrow that down to a match or a lighter. One possibility is taking a match and just flinging it in there, and the other one would be a lighter. And there's several different ways that can happen safely, and that would be, you know, pouring a trailer, which means, so you fill the house with gas and then you just like pour a little line of it to the outside. You light the very end of it, the fire runs in and explodes, or using the lighter to light, say, you know, a wad of newspaper or something else, or a stick to throw it in there, like it. But there has to be. It doesn't have to necessarily be the thing that touched the fire to the gasoline, but somehow the fire had to start, and that's either with a lighter or a match. I think it's just as likely as one as the other.
Okay. Kate says about the lighter, Bob stated the police fire department kept people away from the scene, but didn't the neighbors get close to the house? Did Tim or the others smoke and just have them slip out of pocket?
I don't know. Again, it's a question that we could easily answer.
Right.
Yeah, I have no, but yeah, I mean that before the police got there, yeah, the neighbors were all standing at the end of the driveway, and again, we don't know where the lighter was found. Was it 20 feet into the property? Was it 1 foot into the property? We don't know exactly where it was at. Uli in the chat says, "What does processed material mean?" The key was found in the processed material back there too. The processed material, I think, is the way I took it from reading the report is they were as they were sifting through debris, they were putting all the stuff that they had sifted through or processed into kind of a pile behind the house. Um, so that's what I took as processed material. I do have a picture. I should put the picture up of it, but because I saw like it said they found two keys on a chain in the processed material too,
Mm-hmm.
and I was pretty excited about that. I found it because I was thinking, is that Becky's car keys? But it's not. It's like a long chain and then like keys to like a cheap lock, like you'd have like a suitcase type lock,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. It had two keys like that on it, um,
Okay.
or could go to like a gun cabinet or something like that. I don't know, but those are like very clearly they're clumped up. There's debris on them. There's chunks on them, and that's something if you were sifting through ashes that you would find during the sift, unlike the hair. So that's the confusing part, Uli, too, is like with the hair, as I was just mentioning. Like I certainly don't think it was like buried in a pile of wet. Because remember that I've done this hundreds of times in my life. It's a shitty job.
Mm.
When you're done, you have ashes and stuff that's all been soaked with water, and it's wet and nasty and clumpy, and you sift through it. A lot of we're looking for electrical components and things like that to reconstruct the crime scene. There's just, in my opinion, there's no way that hair came out of something like that. I think it was. He said it was found back in the pile of processed material. Um, but I personally, I don't think that it was like sifted through in the ashes. I think it was just back there.
Regarding the socks, Veronica says, not related to the episode, but I saw a comment saying Javi's DNA was tested against the RNA on Becky's socks. We just talked about this, but Veronica didn't remember if that had been established, and wanted to get that confirmed or denied. And then Karina weighed in and said she thought that it was the episode with the DNA expert. But I just wanted to toss this in there in case you knew right off the top of your head if that's
Well,
where to
can you?
find
I'm
it.
sorry. Can you repeat the beginning of that a little
That
bit?
uh, Veronica saw a comment saying that Javi's DNA was tested against the DNA on Becky's socks,
Oh,
but
yes.
Veronica did not remember that being established and was looking for to be pointed in the direction of where that had existed, if it was in what episode it was in.
Yeah, I can't point you to. It was the episode or the follow up after when we had Susanna Ryan, the DNA expert, on, because in the report when she was reading through it, it didn't show that it was compared to anyone. And then I think during the course of that next week, I found more documents and sent them to her, and that's where we saw that they had compared it to. So it is established. Um, Robert, Christian, Javier, Jacob, all the victims, and I think Ron Friedley were all were all ruled out as contributors of the DNA on the socks.
Mm.
That was established,
And Bo also?
possibly.
Yeah,
Pretty much everybody that, yeah, I think he was, because I remember saying that, because of course people were like, well, that DNA must have been transferred from the, socks grab DNA from everywhere,
right.
which is true, but not in profiles like that, and it's not certainly the most likely scenario of how that DNA got there. Um, but I do recall, like, anyone we know that had been to that house anytime recently had been ruled out.
Yeah. But Teresa just brought up in the chat that it's perhaps the keys could have been locker keys to Denny's if, in fact, they had lockers. That's an
It could
interesting
be.
idea.
For those of you that are in the live stream and anybody listen to this later can go check it out. But I will put the pictures of the keys. Excuse me. I will put the picture of the keys in the case documents for episode 59. Um, I meant to do that and I just forgot to put it in.
Okay. I'm going to just read part of Lana, comment, essentially saying, I'm just really struggling over this lack of testing the evidence. It just seems like such a crazy thing to not do. And this continues to raise concerns from Lana about something political happening here. About, kind of circling back to all the law enforcement connections in the
Mhm.
case and wondering if there's a connection there between a lack of testing or a lack of work done and all of these different people at play and factors at play.
There are a lot of theories out there about corruption and people covering, a cover up or covering for someone. I that's the last place I want to go unless I have evidence of that happening. It seems like it certainly seems like there was kind of a construed effort to kind of protect Javier. But I don't think that makes Javier guilty, right? So, his
Right.
dad was worked in in the DA's office. There was a whole thing about the immunity, and of course, his mom was, which is a weird thing. I can't imagine that here, but it must have been a big deal there because everyone we talked to was like, Javier's mom was a politician down in the like it always comes up, So like, and people are like, Bonnie Garcia's son. So like, even with teenagers, always said like Bonnie Garcia's son. Um, so so it definitely seems like, I would put it this way: Javier had a support group, a group of people that support him that were actively trying to protect him. But I don't think that it just doesn't raise any red flags with me because I haven't seen anything to me to indicate that Javier had anything to do with this crime. Um, so I think there may be a political angle. That there's certainly a political angle about why this case got prosecuted at all. It was like re-election time, and with Hestron and Zellerbach, there was all the stuff and the stolen campaign signs and all that, and people trying to solve this big case to get a big win. The cold case unit, like there was a lot of reasons for that. But I just don't think that there was. My personal opinion, I think Leclerc was an idiot, is what I think. Like, I don't think Leclerc was like, oh well, we don't want to test that DNA because that could be this person or that person, or this was an inside job with the police department, and I don't think it was anything like that. I think he was just terrible at his job.
Hmm.
Um, my personal opinion, unless I see something to indicate otherwise, that there's some kind of corruption to that level where there was like an intentionally hiding evidence at the beginning, at the times when all this stuff should be. I just I don't think that he has the intellect to even plan something like that.
Just circling back to the people whose DNA was tested, Porphyria, I just wanted to clarify out of curiosity, Austin was never one of the people who was sort of on the radar for testing. evidence
I
against.
saw that and I don't
I thought
remember.
we talked about them taking his DNA and
He
you
did. He
confirmed that
did.
they did. Yeah, they did get his DNA, but
Yeah. And I don't want to say yay or nay to that because I don't remember off the top of my head if Austin's DNA was tested against the sock DNA or not.
got it. Kathy says if someone was able to pull up, I love this comment. Kathy says if someone was able to pull up the weather/moon for that day and night, is it also possible to pull up reports from the fire department to see if they made any more specific notes about the make and model/year of the red truck, or to pull up vehicle ownership records for that time period and area, like the search for the white Elantra in the Idaho case? And then Kathy finishes with, I'm trying to establish my identity as the obsessed with the red truck lady.
I mean, certainly law enforcement could do things like um, pull up who. But first of all, no, I don't think there is any more information on the red truck. I mean, we heard Williams testify about it. We see his report about it. Like that's all. Red truck, white bed. I believe he said one person in it. Smaller truck. That's all we know about it. Yeah, there's a world where law enforcement could, and again, that it doesn't have to be that complicated. It's not that big of a community. Like what should have been before they have to worry about any of that, like narrowing down who owns red trucks. They could have just knocked on the doors of the people that live in that community and asked them, "Hey, do you know who owns this truck? Have you ever seen a red truck with a white bed?" It would have been that simple. And again, it's just a big drop ball.
Right. Chris W. says, Barbara Wright said she arrived home not long after the fire started. Did anyone report seeing her car? If no one saw her coming up the hill, isn't it plausible that neighbors didn't see anyone leaving?
Whose car did we not see come up the hill?
Barbara Wright says she arrived home not long after the fire started.
Oh, right. And if nobody saw her car, the
Right.
first of all, somebody else made a post about this on the fan page the other day that I keep saying there was no car that left the scene because nobody saw it. And then they had compared that to like, well, we know there was a red truck and nobody saw that red truck either. And so I want to make clear my point is there's no evidence that anyone left in a car, right? You're working off a presumption of innocence. What evidence do you have that someone left in a car? No one said they saw a car. Also, it's kind of apples and oranges because the red truck, and I'm going to get back to Barbara Wright's car, the red truck was found or was spotted way down in the south end of the neighborhood, nowhere near the crime scene. It was headed in the direct, they say heading away from the crime scene. It was just the crime scene was north of it and it was headed south. It wasn't like it was like zipping around the corner from the crime scene. And no one down there was questioned if they saw a car. So the only people that were questioned were the people that were alerted to the fire early and were headed to the scene at that time, and the immediate neighbors right there were the ones that were spoken to. Those people didn't see any vehicle. Now, Barbara Wright, she was heading towards the crime scene on the east side of the neighborhood and came up. She was, she was on Alpine Drive for just to turn that quick little corner right there, way east of the crime scene. We don't know if other people saw her car because they didn't ask anyone if anybody saw her car. So when I'm talking about nobody seeing a vehicle up there, you have from like 9:40, according to the Captain Williams, on people that are looking like, oh shit, there's a fire. They're looking at it. They're calling 911. They're driving towards it, and no one sees a vehicle driving away from it. Nobody sees a vehicle driving on Alpine Drive. And I should qualify that too. No one says they saw a vehicle. Shockingly, what's never asked any of them in any of their interviews is, did you see a car leaving the crime scene? Did you see a car on Alpine Drive? None of them are ever asked that question. Now, I, common sense wise, would think if there was this arson and triple homicide and you were there right at the beginning and you saw a car driving away from the crime scene, that you would mention, I saw a car driving away from the crime scene. I cannot imagine anyone would not bring that up if they had seen it. But the difference is with Barbara Wright, she's heading not away from, but towards the crime scene, way over on the east side of the neighborhood before anyone was alerted to the fact that there was a fire. No one was looking, no one was suspicious, and it certainly I wouldn't think would stick out in anybody's mind if they look out and see a fire and happen to see a car driving towards the crime scene. and going to
Right.
a different house.
Right. Right. Fair enough.
Real quick,
Oh, sure.
just to catch up with the chat, Montana is in the chat. Wanted to know, is back to you were talking about DNA. She said, "Why
Mm,
did they go to a private lab for DNA testing? Was there a wait if they had gone with the DOJ lab?" Yeah, that was one of the weird things that were pointed out by I think Dolan and Moore. Was the DNA stuff was taken to the DOJ lab, and then they said it was going to be like I don't remember 4 months or something or a certain amount of weeks. It was going to take a long time to get the DNA testing. Um, so then they took it back and then sent it to a private lab, which took. I mean, they pulled sector data a year later. And again, I'm not even claiming there's corruption. Like, oh well, instead we're gonna pay because I don't think they knew who they wanted to arrest at that point. But
mhm.
it's a weird excuse. Like, oh, we don't want to wait 4 months for this DNA, so we're gonna send it somewhere else and spend $10,000-$20,000 to have another lab do it that still we didn't get results back until about the same time we would have got the results back from the other place. And then also we only got Becky's or the Friedley home phone record for 48 hours because it costs $150 a day, and we don't want to pay any more for that. Like it's just a weird disconnect. But yeah, Montana, that was the reason they gave was that it was going to take too long at the DOJ lab, so they sent it from they sent it to a private lab. And regarding you mentioned the moon thing, and a few people are talking about it wasn't the point of their question. But I do want to point out too, when people were talking about the moon phases, because I saw a post on Facebook where people were regarding the car, right? They were
Mhm.
talking about somebody said, well, they would have driven with the lights off. There are no street lights up there.
Oh, you can't do that.
Yeah, there's no street lights up there. And somebody had pointed out what the moon phase was. It's even more important to point out there was no moon. So regardless of what the moon phase was, moonrise was off the top of my head, I want to say 4 in the morning, maybe it was 2 in the morning,
Mm,
but the moon was not in the sky at the time of the murders. So it was pitch black. No, and that's one of the reasons again, like even if headlights were off and it was just brake lights, they would stick out like a sore thumb up there because it was so dark if somebody was leaving. And then if your theory is, well, maybe it was Robert and Christian and they left and they just kept their lights off, let's go back to that drive test time now
hmm,
when you have to
right.
drive out of that neighborhood in those roads in the pitch black with no headlights on.
Right. Yeah, if this was planned, um, and anybody planning it knew the area and knew that, I would imagine that that person or people would build into their plan that they could not drive out of that site without it being an issue, and that you would sort of plan
Yeah.
to not be in a car for at least some portion of the immediate vicinity around the house. But
Yeah. And again, when you get back to like the red truck and even Barbara Wright, you have to understand where the Friedleys lived, where John and Vicky and Becky lived, was almost the most remote area of that. So down where the red truck is seen, there are, I don't know, 50, 100 houses north of there. I don't know, 50, I'm guessing. But there's a bunch of houses north of there and a bunch of different roads and stuff. So to see a car headed south at that point wouldn't stick out in your mind because it could have come from anywhere, any one of those houses. But the crime scene is on the farthest north street on the north side of the road in the dead center away from other roads. It's way out there. So seeing a car driving down that part of Alpine Drive, there's like 4 houses. Look in the aerial maps. Like it is very different to see a car driving down Alpine Drive at 10 o'clock at night than it is to see one down by Buckthorn where that other car was seen.
right. Valeria commented, something struck me when I heard Moore's summary of the Friedleys' escape plan. Quote, something goes wrong, you go out the window. Go out the back to the hills. Valeria says, I went back to look at Drew's interview and she said she felt, quote, unsafe up there. And again, that the plan was to run toward the mountain or to a neighbor. What was this escape plan for? It makes no sense to me if there's a fire, either in the house or in the desert.
I don't know if this is something that was told to me, so it may not be accurate, or if it was that I read in one of the interviews, but my understanding in my mind was this went all the way back to the days when Ron lived there and he was a working police officer. And the plan was always like if something happened because of Ron's connections to law enforcement and the fact that there's criminals that don't like him, because remember the whole Trapani thing with the murder out there that he came to his house. They were buying guns for Tiffany had said something about him buying guns from him or storing guns from him. So my understanding was always that it had to do with that. Like if something ever goes down because of something related to Ron's work, then it's go out the window, go out the back, and then run back into the hills.
Mm,
That was my understanding of it. But if somebody who has some time on their hands wants to search back through those interviews and see if you can confirm that. But that was my understanding of it.
gotcha. Teresa says, and we're almost done. Could either of the defense attorneys mention that there were previous charges that were dropped and point out the new or additional evidence that came in with this trial? They didn't have Jeremy Witt. I think the drive test by Bodmer and the cell coverage maps with the GAR device is what was new.
Yeah, so I missed what the question was with that.
Could either of the defense attorneys mention that there were previous charges? So, in other words, could the defense attorneys at closing say, and by
Oh,
the way, these guys were charged
no.
before? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that. I mean, there's so many rules about even bringing up somebody's past offenses or anything like that, anything that might prejudice the jury. And I will say without searching through it that I can almost guarantee that they were not allowed to bring up the fact that the state had already dropped the case once.
Okay.
I seriously doubt that's the case.
Jason says, are we going to hear any of the defense team's private investigators' interviews?
I don't have any of those interviews. What I have is the state's discovery file, the file that the state presented as discovery.
Okay. Valeria says, can you share a copy of the images/video reconstruction of the house made by Uli Sang and Dylan? Oh, I just shouted out your last name. You don't usually do that, Uli. Sorry. No,
Um,
it's on Facebook.
let me here make sure you clean this up, Kelly. Yeah, as a matter of fact, so Uli and Dylan and I are in a group chat on Facebook about when they were making that, and Uli brought it up last week, and Dylan said that he could email it to me. I don't think I've seen that email, but I'll touch back on that again, um, to see if we can get that because what he did is he put together like a CAD design of the house, and at least in the version that I think he was going to make it into like a movie because the version I had you were able to like drag and move around to see like how the house was laid out based on what we can reconstruct based on drawings and the crime scene photos.
Okay. Um, and then I just wanted to acknowledge that, there were people who really enjoyed you getting very angry in the episode. Uh, so they want you to feel free to do that. And in fact, Rosalind says, can we change the theme music to Y'all Gonna Make Me Lose My Mind by DMX? Because that's what rolls through my head every time Bob Ruff gets pissed and says he's going to lose it.
We were
Please and thank
discussing
you.
this in the Patreon hour before this. There was a little. I don't think anybody caught the little clunks that I had in there. But I was writing the episode as I was in real time as I was going through the materials, and I had found the report about the hair. Also, I want to give another. I have already, but a big shout out to Valeria again
Mm-hmm.
because Valeria just happened to a week before found the information about that lighter and brought it to my attention is the only reason I ended up down this rabbit hole to begin with because more in his cross, says, she grabbed that green, they used that green lighter and started the fire. That jumped, like I was like, oh, that's the lighter that Valeria was talking about. Had she not done that, there's a good chance the way my brain works, I would have read right past that and not just thought he was just making up a lighter, not that they had actually found one on the scene. But so I was down that rabbit hole, found the report about the hair, and then wrote this whole thing about how we don't know anything about the hair. Got way down further into the script, and then ran down that rabbit hole and found like the picture of the hair and all that. And so everything from the first moment I mentioned the hair until like that next break was not in the script. That was just me finding it and just going off about it. Which it was. You may note me going, that hair. The most logical thing is it could be Becky's, and then a little while later you hear me going, it can't be Becky's. It's because of the order of when I wrote
Right.
it and when I just kind of lost it. So anyway, um, I it definitely makes me want to lose my mind too.
Well,
Every single day of this case is killing me.
I know. I know. I will say, and maybe this is not appropriate to say, but I always get uncomfortable when when you say things like calling Leclerc an idiot because to me that feels so personal, and in my head I'm like, well, we've already explained that this is a shoddy investigation. That just seems like a personal attack, but I guess I'm
It
just saying
is.
that on
It
behalf
is, and
of
it's
yeah.
not. It's
I
probably
understand. I understand, but
and it's
I know
and I
that's
will
probably yeah
acknowledge.
yeah.
I will acknowledge that's not very nice of me to do, to tell you that I feel that way. And truthfully, I probably shouldn't. A good journalist wouldn't. Thankfully, I'm not a
Maybe that's
journalist.
why I bristle
Yeah,
sometimes.
I just, as you guys know, I will to tell you how it is and tell you how I
I
feel.
know.
And listen, you guys hear 2 hours of me talking every week. I spend 60 hours buried in this file, and that's what you get for, because like when I'm looking at all the things we could know and we don't know, and you're trying to find a reason why. Like, give me a reason. Give me, for Christ's sake, give me a good reason why we don't know these answers. And that good reason every time just lands on because the lead investigator didn't do his job. That's why I think he's an idiot. But that's just my personal
I
opinion.
know. Well, I'm in the minority. I'm in the minority,
I
and
don't think
so
you are. I don't think,
no,
I'm sure there's plenty of
it's
people
been
that.
made clear to me already in the chat, but please don't laugh because that's tone deaf, and I understood myself to be that. Please cut all of that out, Kelly. Uh, anyway, so that's what I have for it this week. Thanks everybody for all of your amazing feedback. The one thing that we did want to make sure we did not miss, and thanks Jennifer and Valeria for making sure I remember this, is that we did want to wish Robert Pape a very happy birthday, as happy as you can experience one if you are
Mhm.
in prison for something you didn't do. Um, that if that's biased, sorry. I feel like we've already established that that is the point of view of this podcast.
Yeah, and so his birthday was yesterday, right? Which, when you're hearing this, was Tuesday. Um, and look for Valeria on Facebook if you want to, because she's helped organize some messages from listeners and stuff to send to Robert. So all that's going on. Yeah, and I think it's a good one to wrap up. Um, yeah, let me clean this up a little better, because I was going to make a snarky, sarcastic remark to someone in the chat, and I decided not to. I've decided to be the bigger person. So let me. All right, so that is all we have for today. We're going to wrap things up. Make sure that you tune in on Sunday, when we're going to finally wrap up the trial. We get the final word heard by the jury, which was the state's rebuttal by Aki, and it's a little bit different presentation than you're used to. You're going to get the full context of everything that Aki said to the jury before they went in to deliberate. Tune in on Sunday for that. Everybody, make sure you tell Zach to get well, so that he can be back next week.
Yeah, get well soon, Zach. We miss you.
Yep. And we'll see everybody. Love all you guys. Thank you guys all in the YouTube chat and for your Facebook questions. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. We hit stop on our record. You can hit stop on your audio. And then we'll
Done.
chat with the YouTube here for a minute. If anybody has any super chats they want to pop in there. We tried to. There was a good chat going on today, and I found myself I think 3 times I had to ask you to repeat the question. Because I was reading what was getting me was a bunch of people were saying Amy 100, which, you know, my feelings about 100. You already texted me that last week.
Yeah.
So I was trying to go back and see, what did Amy say? And now I just found it. Amy said, bottom line, it was a bungled investigation and a miscarriage of justice for everyone involved. Becky, Vicky, John deserved better, and Christian and Robert got screwed. 100% agree with that, Amy. 100, I would say to that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and Jennifer Hill says it's for Zach to stop being sick.
Yeah, no joke.
Anything else we missed in there? Don't see anything. And we're going to wrap this up. We're doing, for those of you that just love to watch us talk nonsense live, the Distinguished Shit Show will be live tomorrow, or the still trying to figure out what that is, but Jan and I are going to live stream, talk about some kind of nonsense tomorrow. What do we say, 9 o'clock your time?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, noon Eastern time, 9 a.m. Western time. That's what
Yeah.
I'm going to start calling it.
Western time. Yeah.
Western time.
Great.
We'll be on here, so feel free to jump in. If you're looking for something serious, that's not the place to go. We're just goofing around. We just
Yeah.
goof around on the YouTubes on those lives. Jason's, hang on, right, quick question. Earlier, when it was mentioned that Christian said he thought her body was in a dumpster, were there pics of the dumpster in the paper? Good question. I don't know if there were pictures of the dumpster in the paper, but there was definitely video of the dumpster on the news.
I
Because
thought the
remember, that's
dumpster turned out to be there was no dumpster. They put their trash in a van
well,
or something.
it looked like
I
a
don't
dumpster
remember.
though. Just
Okay,
just north of the garage, they
gotcha.
had like fence on three sides,
I see. I see.
and there might have even been a dumpster in there, but they just
Okay,
piled it up in there, and then they put it in the van to take it to the
gotcha.
dump. They didn't have a
Gotcha.
pickup.
Gotcha.
But remember, that was absolutely featured in the news, the video news, because that's when Tiffany said she saw the picture of Robert laying out there and all the crap from the dumpster.
Gotcha.
She saw that on the news, so yeah, maybe that's where that came from. I'm sure the guilty crowd will think that doesn't mean anything. For me, that's, seems, unless he's a real good liar, seems like a good indication that he doesn't really know what was going on. It was just kind of piecing things together from what he had heard.
Right.
Uh, thanks so much, Brian, for that super chat. All right. I think we answered all that because Rena asked when the live is tomorrow. I think we already answered that. True Crime Buffet. Um, this is Teresa. Love you guys. Miss Zach, he's my favorite. Thank you, Danielle, with the super chat. Says, love you guys. Miss Zach, he's my Come on, Dan.
No, Danielle had
No,
to
he's
slip
not
that
your
in to make
favorite.
Bob mad.
Yeah, just for that, I'm gonna buy a cup of coffee with that $4.99 and drink it myself right in front of Zach.
Uh,
He won't care. He
uh,
doesn't like coffee. Not a coffee guy. All right, I'm gonna stop this live chat. Thank you guys so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you for the super chats; those help out a lot. And we'll talk to you guys next week or tomorrow if you want to join in on the True Crime Live.